good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Very warm welcome to this webinar hosted by Upstream. The title is Emerging Cybersecurity Risks in Automotive Manufacturing and Smart Mobility. And dear Jonathan, the 1 million question, what to do about it? I am the VP of Market Development here at Upstream. I will be hosting this webinar, and I'll introduce in a minute Jonathan. Before we jump into the webinar itself, two things I wanted to share with the audience here. So first of all, you will find a button on this Zoom, and if you have questions, please do so. Ask them. We will be more than happy to respond to that at the end of this webinar. And another note is that this webinar is being recorded. So if at any point people need to leave, or you want to do an invite so that people may get the recording afterwards, feel free to do so. It will be shared afterwards. Now, without further ado, Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, would. Thank you again for having me. So hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan. I am from ABeam Consulting. We're a Japanese consulting company, and I'm currently located here in Thailand, Bangkok. And I look into our mobility unit all over Southeast Asia. So today, again, thanks for having me. Together with Upstream, I will be trying to give some insights from the business side in terms of what are the kind of challenges that we see, what are the kind of probably misconceptions we have of this kind of topic. I will ask Giuseppe to give us maybe some interesting examples as to what's happening around the world, because it's still a little bit different here in Southeast Asia in general. And of course, for the ones who are joining, our background will be mostly, or my personal background is mostly working with Japanese OEMs, not exclusively, but being in Southeast Asia, you will see that Japanese OEMs make the biggest part of the fleets here on the streets. And that will also lead into some of the points I believe we're going to discuss today regarding connected vehicles. So thanks again. I'm looking forward to talking with you about this topic, Giuseppe.
It's a real pleasure. And, I'm really excited because this is a special webinar. First of all, yesterday we announced the collaboration between Upstream and ABeam. So I'm really excited about that. And secondly, Upstream presents webinars on various topics, which are more addressing globally cybersecurity. Now, in this case, we are shedding some lights in particular with regards to the Asian region. So it's an exciting topic to share with the audience here. Now, without further ado, as I said previously, the $1 million question, what to do about cybersecurity risks that are emerging in the auto industry and in the smart mobility at large. So let's dive into it. And maybe starting with the first comments. Despite the fact that regulations is out there, best practices is out there, knowledge is being shared in the industry among peers, we still see a big growth, exponential growth. And this data that you see here is from the report that Upstream publishes every year. So this is the last year's report, 2023. We have the 2024 edition of that coming in a few months, and it shouldn't be a secret, but as you can imagine, the number will continue to grow. Now, with that in mind, let's shed some light on what's going on also in the region. Now, these numbers obviously have a perspective on the global incidents. Now, when it comes to the Asian market, Jonathan, what is your impression when we talk about cybersecurity? What's going on in that region?
Yeah, so I believe what can be safely said is that cybersecurity, even though it is a topic that many OEMs talk about, it is not considered as essential to solve at the very moment. And the reason for that is very obvious and understandable, that connected vehicles aren't just as prevalent yet in Southeast Asia or the region here. Most of the cars are still not connected. They're just normal vehicles. Over-the-air updates is not something that we do have for the majority of the fleets yet. And because of this, cybersecurity always takes a little bit of a back burner, because what we are looking at is trying, or for companies, is to try to invest into something that they have very little of, which is this connected fleet. Why would you spend money on something that you have probably very small attack vectors at the moment? But we see that this is obviously slowly increasing now, also with the introductions of electric vehicles, especially here in Thailand, where I'm sitting, where we currently are experiencing an immense amount of growth for electric vehicles.
Right. Now, if we go and look more particularly on the attack vectors, you mentioned that the product itself, maybe the connectivity, is something that is not yet comparable to other parts of the world where connected features are maybe more rampant. But how do you see in terms of the entire ecosystem? So you mentioned one, the electrification and maybe charging stations. The attack vectors, based on our understanding of the current situation in the market, is that the attack vectors and the threat surface is growing. And you see here some numbers. For instance, charging station is new, but it's already at 4% of the incidents. And mobile, so the connected services, the telematics, the off-board smart mobility ecosystem is something that we see on a global scale to be very relevant. More importantly, it's no longer the single product that is at risk. So while a few years ago, maybe you could say, okay, this model or this particular feature in a car could be an issue in terms of cybersecurity. Today, that's no longer the case. Actually, the barrier to do bad things has been lowered due to this interaction with the smart mobility ecosystem. And therefore, it's a matter of how much the attacks can scale. Now, on the contrary, you said connectivity for connected vehicle is not so much a thing in the Asian region. However, assuming this will change over time, over the next couple of years, because if people are very acquainted with technologies that they use every day, they may expect that also on the vehicle. What is your take on that?
Yes, so we will definitely see a change, and we see the change actually already in some of the markets, especially when we're looking at the distribution of how the market composition here in Southeast Asia, which are the brands, which are the models that are being sold in this market. As I mentioned earlier, it's obviously dominated mostly by Japanese OEMs. That, of course, it's not that they don't have any connected vehicles. I mean, that's not the case. But again, the majority of cars that are being sold, the majority of services that are available are still just, let's say, call them traditional vehicles. They're being sold. Number one, ICEs, of course. We have heard now many times that the overall strategy coming from the Japanese side is still to focus on hybrids. It is still to say that EVs are not the solution to being completely sustainable, which of course has its pros and cons when we discuss that. But what we have been seeing now over the last few years only, that from China, we have gotten a huge influx of new models, especially electric vehicles. And yes, here on this slide, so you can see since 2015 how these market shares have been shifting. So this is for Southeast Asia. It looks actually a lot more dire if we look at Thailand specifically. But here what you can see is that since 2015, the share of Japanese brands has slowly been decreasing, while the share of Chinese brands over the last 2 years alone has more than doubled. And if we look even further on the next slide, we can see that out of the models that are being sold, this is for Thailand specifically, because as most of you probably know, Thailand is currently the country with the most EV sales in Southeast Asia. The most BEVs are, number one, sold by Chinese brands, over 80%. Then we have other brands, which is usually, of course, Tesla plays a big role. We have BMW, Volvo, Mercedes-Benz. So the Western car makers are selling. Japanese brands are almost at 0%. The reason that they were at 20% before was because there were so little car sales that even just a few cars sold amounted for a larger percentage. And more importantly, if we look now at the connected vehicles, so these are cars that out of the gate are able to receive over-the-air updates, which is what we're discussing today, you can already see that over 50% of the top sold BEV models alone are today connected vehicles. And that number will only keep increasing with the growth that we're currently experiencing here in Thailand, looking at the incentives that the government is trying to do. So making sure that this is secure as possible is number one, very important. And number two, and I believe you're going to talk about this also in a moment, is that the necessity that OEMs should see from this is that now we're getting to a point where a connected vehicle becomes the lowest bar as to what you would expect from a product. If I buy a car, and I mean, this has happened with smartphones, right? You had the flip phones before everything. It had to be, iPhone came out, the expectation is that you can touch it, right? It becomes a touchpad. If we look at cars, I mean, it's going to be the same thing, that a car should be something that can be customized. It's something I can connect from my house. It's not just a product I buy in a traditional sense and keep using. And this is something where we still see a very big disconnect with the business side, that they're considering cybersecurity as a defense. They're not seeing it as an opportunity.
Now, that's a very interesting point that you made. And maybe it's also interesting to shed some light. What is your perspective on the various business models that we see here? So you mentioned, for example, and we see here Tesla, who has more of a B2C approach versus other players who maybe also, to name Japanese brands, they have a more traditional approach with dealerships. Now, where do you see that to be a big difference in terms of the numbers that you shared for the connectivity that are expected on the car on one hand? On the other hand, the introduction of those services with brands which have played, quote unquote, with these features and capabilities, introducing obviously new attack vectors in terms of cybersecurity, because this is all data and software driven. How do you see that to be an important factor in the region?
I do believe this is a fairly important factor. We have now slowly starting to see the emergence of the agency model, which is still using agents, but is where the distributor is selling directly to the customers. We have in Thailand, of course, examples of how this is working. For Great Wall Motors, for example, where we have this agency model. We see other companies trying to adapt it slowly. We have seen in Australia already happen for Mercedes-Benz. We see it in other countries as well, where there are plans of getting this done. In terms of the connected vehicle, it will become a very important factor in how we differentiate the brands. At the moment, when you have the traditional model still, as you mentioned, it's B2B2C, the dealers themselves are still incentivized because they need to sell in order to generate revenue, in order to get their services. The revenue streams are still very standard, and they have this incentive of trying to sell as much as they can. So there's a lot of effort put in. The moment that you move over to an agency model where theoretically the distributor is selling directly to the customer, then it's on a commission based. You don't really have to chase the customers anymore because you don't have the risk of the floor planning, right? You don't need to invest into your stock. You don't have these running costs of just having a yard where all the cars are. All this cost is shifted over to the OEMs. Now, in this cases, then, of course, what we have seen in some shape or form is there becomes a little bit of a complacency on the dealer side, that I don't have to kill myself over this because I will not lose money. I can still make money out of the servicing. If people come to me, that's great. So what you need to focus on then is the experience that customers have. A, can you have a standardized experience across all your different dealerships? And B, once you have the product, this is how the distributor can directly interact with the customers. This is where initially we would buy a product, you make a one-time big investment, and then your product degrades over time, right? It becomes older, you're driving it more and more, and it just depreciates, right, in value. That's just how it is. It's an investment. But what we can see now with connected vehicles and how this will also impact potentially dealerships, insurances, and so on, is that it opens up more channels where We can add features, we can activate features in the car that people could potentially pay subscription services for. We see that there are more vectors for dealers to work. So many people don't even see that the possibility could be that as a dealer to offer a concierge service, for example, that I'm able to remotely unlock a vehicle while my customers are working. I can go to their office, unlock the car, I can get in, drive it to my dealership, fix it, and drop it back off. That would be amazing, especially in Bangkok. The traffic is horrible. You don't really want to waste your weekend. You don't want to waste a weekday to try to bring your car to servicing, being stuck in traffic. You lose a lot of time. But the opportunity that with a connected vehicle, you didn't have this inconvenience anymore is a huge added potential service that would make your brand stand aside or be very competitive compared to the rest. Very attractive, in my opinion. And of course, this can only be managed if we have all the same platform. More important in a direct customer B2C model, but even still a possibility for a B2B2C model, a little bit harder maybe to implement in terms of security, but still also very important.
Yeah, so you mentioned that there is a sort of reluctancy to go all in. Maybe there are brands that are taking a bigger share in those markets. However, if we look at the next slide, and I know you wanted to talk specifically about Thailand as an example. Is it that the connected vehicle, in terms of adoption, is perceived as a risk in terms of the services that introduce? And what is the elephant in the room here then? Is it to be scared about cybersecurity? Is it data privacy? What is it that is holding back from going all in, like in other countries in Europe or in the US?
Okay, so I think there are two sides here. Number one is, of course, the supply. Do we even have access to connected vehicles if we wanted to in these markets? Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam. Most of the time, the answer would have been no. It's just not available at the moment. There's no connected car service. The first companies to pioneer this in the region have been BMW, Mercedes-Benz, the more premium segment. For the mainstream segments, we didn't really have even the option to do so. Now, with the introduction of some of the Chinese OEMs, or actually MG in Thailand, most of them were already connected. The availability of affordable vehicles for the masses was there, okay, could be connected. What we have then done, and this is the slides that I'm showing, or that you're showing here, is we did a survey. Okay, now that you have the availability of connected cars, how concerned are you? What are you concerned about? And the interesting part is, again, we're using here Thailand as the example because it actually has the highest usage of social media, internet. So the Thai consumer is on the phone in average 8 hours and 6 minutes per day, which is very, very, very much. The global average 6 hours 37. I believe we were overtaken since the last year. At some point, Thailand was ranked #1. Most people have a cell phone. Most people on social media. So there is, of course, already people are sharing. Instagram is everywhere. You share your private pictures, you share your data, and it's a common thing in Thailand. But when we asked them about the car specifically, if you had a connected car or connected vehicle, what are your concerns about? How concerned are you? And we saw that 10% of the surveys were very concerned, almost half of them somewhat concerned. So more than half of them are concerned. And we asked them what it was about. It's fear of identity theft, the car getting hacked, what I mentioned before, right? That there could be a service where the dealer goes for you, they unlock your car, service it for you, which is great. But at the same time, it means that someone who can unlock my car might not always be my dealer. It might be someone who just wants to keep the car once it's unlocked. So how secure is it? And also having a clear understanding how the data will be used potentially against them in case of an accident or whatever insurance case, talking about pay how you drive, all of this is a little bit still messy. And I think maybe you will have some examples for us. This comes also from this impression that there have been a lot of incidents globally from our traditional car makers. There are big headlines that come to Thailand as well, that there has been an issue in Japan, there's been an issue in the United States. These are the big brands that are dominating the Thai and Indonesian market, for example. But now we have a new brand coming in from China that doesn't have negative publicity today. there has been no negative backlash yet. So, and most of the Japanese OEMs are not doing yet in an aggressive manner this effort towards creating trust. That is just not currently something that's on the agenda. Again, connected vehicles, very small fleet out of the total that we have. And no one is starting to think about this, to think about in the long term, that in 10 years might be different. And starting then to try to build trust might be a bit too late.
I think that's really fascinating and interesting to compare it with some other data. So people around the world now, no matter if it's in Thailand, where it's the #1 usage with more than 8 hours or less, but it's fair to say that the connectivity, the interaction with the mobile and digital world today is something that has been adopted on a global scale. And in terms of the risks that, or the reluctancy that you shared with us, it reflects very much also on a global scale what is among the top 3 incidents or vulnerabilities that you can find in our report, meaning data privacy is very important, or data breaches or IP identity theft. It's really an important thing. However, it's ironic to say on one hand, the big usage and everyone is using mobile devices to do everything from banking transaction to ride hailing and sharing. Everything is fueled by APIs. And in fact, there's some statistics here that roughly 85–90% of the entirety of attacks is related to API security, and almost 50% of the attacks worldwide, not just automotive, are related to the services or interaction between a device and an endpoint, and in this case fueled by the API. So you see here some data again from the last year's report, where this number has gone significantly up, almost 380% up, or 12% of the total incidents in the automotive industry can be related to API and traced back to API attacks. And this number has been growing significantly with the introduction and adoption of new services on one hand. On the other hand, also because of the software-defined vehicle that is everywhere around us, and the promise that comes with it. So on one hand, the sophistication and introduction of even more software on the product side, meaning the vehicle, yet at the same time, you talked about customer experience, leveraging the ability to personalize, to make a product not a one-size-fits-all product, but with the features, with the tailor-made opportunity of interaction with features and functionality to make it really a personal item. And you see here examples from the industry who believe that there is a significant opportunity for the automotive industry to leverage the software-defined vehicle capability, meaning you can update your car not just once every 4 or 5 years by introducing a new model, but the same model now has the ability very much to be altered, changed, adapted, upgraded to your personal taste, or for security features as they go along with the new capabilities to be updated over the air. Now, how do you see that in the Asian market to be relevant when it comes to sharing data on mobile personal devices, and the car, who is, as we rightly said, following the pattern of the telecom industry and being a computing platform on wheels, which is just lagging 10 years behind the mobile industry?
I do believe it should be very relevant. I believe that unfortunately today in most of Southeast Asia, it wouldn't be, unfortunately. And again, that's because of the slow adoption, I believe, but it could be very relevant. We already talked about the way that you could enable dealerships. I mean, I had just one example, but the options are almost limitless, right? Preventive maintenance, predictive maintenance, fleet health. When we talk about even from a commercial person, not just passenger vehicles, right? Because most of the time we think about it, oh, it's passenger vehicles, but commercial vehicles, even agriculture vehicles, so anything that will require ongoing maintenance to make sure, like you mentioned, that you can upgrade it. You don't always have to switch out the entire engine, or the entire vehicle, but to get exactly what you need for the job that you are doing. You mentioned safety, you mentioned some additional features, but even when it comes to efficiency, right? Making sure that over time the car can, or the vehicle can be tuned to reduce, for example, the amount of fuel that it consumes. When we talk about commercial vehicles, of course, the importance of fuel consumption, being able to, for example, throttle a specific vehicle when we see that the driver is having an erratic behavior or they really like to accelerate. Most of the time, we are being very reactive. We saw that the driver decided to accelerate a lot, burn a lot of fuel, and okay, they burn more fuel than they needed to. But with the connected vehicle or the software-defined vehicle, this is something that almost in real time can be curbed. We have seen some examples where on specific trucks, you might have a camera to make sure that the person that's driving doesn't fall asleep. I mean, this is a feature you could deactivate to potentially also have a different revenue stream on this side, or geofencing, that you are transporting goods that shouldn't be driven around at the very fast pace, especially when you go into a factory, right? That you can only drive up to 30 kilometers an hour or 20, whatever the security measures are. So it can be very relevant in terms of safety, in terms of efficiency. But at the moment, especially for commercial vehicles, we see that companies are doing the bare minimum required by local regulations, which is the GPS, the driving time. That's kind of it. They are not really tapping into this potential of what else you could be doing to manage your fleet even better. And maybe last but not least, insurance, pay how you drive. Again, it's not something that we have now a lot here in Southeast Asia, but it's something we are hearing from in other countries. And now it's not that people are clamoring to have this, but it comes again to the same point that that's the bare minimum. You should be offering this to us, because it is technically possible. If I would want to do pay how you drive, I should be allowed to do it. Are you going to be the company that doesn't offer it on time, the laggard that's going to do it later? So it should be relevant. It isn't yet, but it will be soon if people don't pick up on it quickly, before potentially players from other countries like China are going to do it first and better than the rest.
So what I'm hearing from you is essentially, and would be my summary of what you just said. So there's two angles. One is doing the customer journey, the customer satisfaction in a right way, excel in overwhelming with new features, capability, and give the opportunity to use a product in ways that today have not been explored on one hand. On the other hand, for dealers and for the OEM itself, it's a tremendous opportunity to learn how their customers, their consumers, the users of the products are interacting with the vehicle. And that being a data-driven model in order to not only unlock and provide the opportunity to do and tap into new business areas, but also obviously going along with it, protecting what is new. Now, in terms of maturity, do you think that the fear is that you have to do cybersecurity as a big bang and you have to do all the things at once and you have to build the most secure, the most robust, which obviously is always very relevant and or important? Or couldn't it be that you can start small with the features that are relevant to be protected because they could have significant impact, and then start the maturity? Now, going back to the adoption of connected feature, maybe that could be an interesting route for the Asian market, isn't it?
Exactly. And this is exactly where it should be. It's not that, okay, once the market is so large, now I have to do everything. That's just bound to cause problems. I don't want to say fail because not everyone does fail, but now that the market is still small, now is where you can start testing your market. You can start testing features while they still can be contained to a specific group of people or a specific group of functions, right? You don't want to have, okay, now we have this large market. Now we're going to bring out all the features that we have in our home market, everything at once for it to potentially cause even bodily harm to some people, depending what features you're implementing, right? So I believe taking the opportunity to start small, test a few features now, even if they might not be today economically viable, but them becoming the building stone for you to later go forward and explore more is the way that I would recommend my customers to do. But it has been a very big fight between always IT side and business side, that many times security is seen as a cost center only. You have to do it, but no one really wants to do it. And they're not being enough interaction with the business side, that they don't understand that by doing this, by being able to have this visibility of all of these different vectors and data points, you can actually achieve so much more on your own revenue streams. That is still something that is missing, because I believe not everyone has the capability to think about use cases or doesn't have the experience. And just the idea of being able to start small and then to grow into it is something that's very important. And we have seen this also now with the Chinese OEMs coming to Thailand, for example, people asking, when did they suddenly get so good? They didn't suddenly become this good. They just worked for a very long time in the markets. They've been producing cars now for 2 decades. And the same will be the case for cybersecurity connected vehicles as well. You need to start at some point, slowly make your way up, adding these features rather than waiting for your home country to come up with the big suite of features and then try to leapfrog everyone. That's just bound to cause issues, probably bad quality, deteriorating the trust of your customers, making the customer experience worse.
Yeah, and it's important to point out that in terms of the product and the mobility cybersecurity, actually it involves the entire organization. So in classic IT security, maybe it's just the IT people talking to IT people, because you want to be able to use your computers or your networks or your manufacturing plant. But here, actually, it's the entire organization that needs to be aware of. And I think if we look at the history of recalls, now this is going into the brand and the reputation. Now, many times the recall and the impact of those recalls, which can be very significant and profound, we don't really know if some of that could be related to cybersecurity. Man, there is a lot of these days researchers, but also more bad actors doing bad stuff on connected vehicles. However, the majority of the recalls today are simply flagged as functionality that you need to update. But how do we know that it's actually not so much safety related, or in other words, we know that cybersecurity goes hand in hand with safety at the end of the day. How do we know that it's not actually something that was triggered by a cyber attack, right?
Definitely, yes. And this is exactly what I mentioned before. Since you hear the lack of trust that people have if something like this happens, and especially established brands are having this issue at the moment. You come up with a connected feature now, but can we really trust you in what you're doing, especially if you're trying to implement so many things at the same time rather than going step by step?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously the logos depicted here, they are just for illustration. There's more examples obviously in the industry.
Yes.
And I mean, we are talking in general about the industry and the players over there. You mentioned that in particular for the Chinese OEMs, there has no there was no, or there is no, as of to date, bad sentiment, because everything is new. Even the brands are new, so there is no history like for the Toyotas or General Motors or you name it, players that have been around for hundreds of years. So it's important to understand that this is a problem that is concerning for the entire automotive industry. And I guess this is how the industry is also talking about it, correct?
Definitely, yes. And there hasn't been negative marketing or PR yet. There definitely will be at some point. The question is, what have you achieved when this moment comes, and how will you handle it at that point? That's just what's going to be important. Can you be swift in your reaction, or is it the moment that you start building your defenses, right? Of course, you should have everything in place already so that you can fix it within hours and regain the trust quickly.
Yeah. Now, how is this enabled? How can you be as agile and flexible and deal with all the regulations, the things that we talked about? So, on one hand, excel the customer experience, yet being able to understand how the usage is legitimate or maybe not legitimate, how to understand and being able to differentiate between any anomalies that is part of a digital world, meaning there's some malfunction, maybe someone is tampering with it, so it's misusing in an illegitimate way, or maybe large-scale cyber attack. And I believe we agree that data is the secret here. So having a comprehensive way for the data, for the processes, strategizing and understanding how the data needs to be leveraged in order to address cybersecurity concerns on one hand. On the other hand, also to uplift the expectations that customers have from a digital world to the product that they use in the automotive world. I would like to hear your perspective on that.
Well, so definitely it is incredibly important, and maybe most people might not understand that going through these cybersecurity steps, right, to make sure that you have the visibility on anomalies, on everything that you just mentioned, right, it means that you need to be able to have full digital visibility of your product, which, and this is maybe a term many people have heard, but maybe have not connected to cybersecurity, which is the digital twin. It means that we can replicate that vehicle on a digital basis pretty much in real time, making sure that, as you mentioned, what is happening, what's going on. And because we do have the digital twin, it's not just to monitor and stop anomalies, but then we can start utilizing the data. And this is where cybersecurity as the fundamental basis for this digital twin starts paying off and becoming a profit center. You have it here on the data sources, being able to add stuff to companion apps, remote access, being able to do car sharing, being able to help dealerships, suppliers. I mean, we say car sharing here, but even sharing of, in Thailand, for example, we have agriculture equipment that sometimes is not owned by one person, but might be owned by a village, by a group of farmers that want to share this vehicle between each other in order to use it to the maximum efficiency. All of these things, of course, are secure and manageable once you have these data points clear and visible to you through a strong cybersecurity platform, which I hope is something that between both of our companies, we will be able to bring to customers that are interested in understanding this and leveraging this type of technology and capabilities that can enable their entire ecosystem to function stronger, safer, and more efficiently.
That's very well said. And please allow me to summarize it in other words, using an analogy here. So for everything that we have discussed so far, if we take what you said, it's an opportunity to not look at cybersecurity as a cost, but actually as an opportunity. So the analogy would be, do you see the glass half full or half empty? Or in other words, transferred to the automotive world, are brakes there to slow down the vehicle? Or actually, as we would argue, it's an opportunity. It's actually the opposite. It allows you to go even faster with the knowledge that at any point you can slow down and then increase the speed again. So maybe if that is summarizing our discussion, if this is a good wrap up, I would like to very much thank you for the conversation. I really enjoyed it, and maybe it's time to take some questions from the audience. Let's look at the
questions. So everyone, there's still time to submit questions if you have any.
Of course.
Here's one question I can see, which is, will only battery electric vehicles benefit from connected car features? In my opinion, no. ICEs can also benefit from connected car features. There's, of course, an argument to be made that electric vehicles have a little bit more reach into what you can achieve, because you have less parts in an electric vehicle, of course, less parts have to be monitored. So hydraulic components in an ICE, of course, doing over-the-air updates to make them more efficient is a lot more difficult to do. In an EV, that's something that's a lot easier. So they will definitely benefit. There are probably more benefits on the BEV when it comes to efficiency. But when it comes to fleet management, preventive maintenance, all of these, there is no differentiation between electric or not. I don't know, Giuseppe, if you want to add anything. Otherwise, I will read the next question that just popped in.
No, it's okay. Go. Let's go to the next question. We have a couple of questions. So
here, the other one we have is, does any insurance company offer cyber insurance just for vehicles? Maybe you have some experience on that.
Yes, I think, and I mean, part of the investors to Upstream are coming from the insurance world. Obviously, in the ecosystem of smart mobility, insurance plays an important role. I believe that the industry, the insurance industry, is very keen to be able to address also cybersecurity in ways that reflect the new risk. And what I can share is we are working with various insurance companies, offering intelligence to those companies related to particular vehicles, models, regions, and how this could affect the underwriting process, and therefore having an opportunity to account for cybersecurity in regards to insurance vehicle.
Very cool, Giuseppe. Actually, there has been another question related to the insurance, maybe kind of a follow-up that says here, what is your view on insurance perspective, for example, in the case of a cyber incident that happened to a connected vehicle? Who should pay for it? Is it the car OEM that's responsible for it? Will the insurance be responsible for it? So in these cases, what is your stance on who should be responsible for that?
Well, I think it should be clear that the OEM who is selling the final product obviously will be always the one who is in charge and responsible for cybersecurity. However, we know that the large ecosystem of suppliers are providing prepackaged components, which for intellectual property reasons, the content of the software is not always disclosed. So there is a challenge here, on one hand, to be responsible, on the other hand, with the ecosystem, to be responsive to the cyber security concerns, and the industry is working very closely. There's various organizations such as Auto-ISAC or ASRGs or other entities that help to address cybersecurity for the industry at large, sharing best practices, information, and make sure that this is not becoming a competitive advantage for the ones who are more prone to address or can address more resources to the topic of cybersecurity versus others who may prioritize or have a different risk appetite at large. Next question. Does connected vehicle expose more potential risk and privacy concern as compared to non-connected vehicle? Well, obviously, yes. So with connectivity, with software, there comes risk. And I think there's plenty of data to suggest that the majority of attacks today are remote. But I would say it's not different to using mobile devices. So mobile phones, etc. They're all exposed because of the interaction with the internet. So everything that gets connected to the internet is an unsecure place, but because it's not controlled by anybody, and therefore the risk that malicious actors will try to exploit that is a given fact. Yeah.
Maybe just to add, of course,
Yeah,
I mean,
please.
as Giuseppe mentioned, of course, the potential risk is there, but also what you need to consider is when we talk specifically privacy concerns, let's say customer data, their history of servicing and so on of behavior, even though it's not a connected car, most of this data is still maintained on dealer management systems and so on. So depending on the attack vector, right, there's still a concern to be had regarding the data privacy. One, of course, specific to the car, when it's connected, yes, but also you need to consider all the other elements that are connected to this, even for your insurance companies, right? You make payments every month. All of these systems are connected. If they're not sufficiently secured, you will have a problem even with non-connected vehicles on that front.
Next question. So how do you help bring a vehicle security center service model in production? I'm not sure I 100% understand the question, but I believe we talked about it. So everything is new in the auto industry. So the new features, the new functionalities, there is no such thing as experience that you can leverage. So we are building new capabilities where the risk is not always 100% anticipated. So you can think of how should I protect this feature or functionality. It's really hard to know the unknown unknowns, to put it in that perspective, and therefore it's something that we need to have experience as we operate new things. It's like taking a rocket and going to the moon. There are so many things that could go wrong. However, there's a lot of effort, maybe on the positive side, there's a lot of effort by practitioners, by the industry, governments, as you can see with the regulation, to make sure that this is as secure as it can be, and a lot of effort and resources are put into the industry to make riding, transportation secure, as it has always been. A lot of regulations are related to safety, and there have been many advancements improving the ability to safeguard people's property and life. Any add-on to that, Jonathan?
No, I think you covered it pretty much.
Okay.
I learned something from your answer, so that's great.
maybe the last question, I think this is an interesting one. Is the cybersecurity tailored to a specific country? Well, I would say no, because the internet, as we mentioned earlier, cybersecurity has no frontier or boundaries. What you could do technically in one country effectively is something that you could do anywhere. In theory, obviously, vehicles are sold in different countries where you have different regulations for safety, for the most part, or even for privacy. There's more than 100 privacy laws around the world. So you need to comply with that, definitely. But I would say that cybersecurity is a general concern, and the way to treat and handle it is something that requires a comprehensive approach. It requires knowing the data that is underlying and relevant for protecting the new business models, and therefore it's imperative to have the ability to understand what is possible and how does this reflect on the single country, what needs to be done there because regulatory or other constraints required to do so. Wonderful. Yeah, okay, I think looking at the clock, I see also a question. I believe we will share the slides. We will share the recorded session. And if you have any further questions, please reach out to us. We're happy to respond to any questions that we may have not answered today. Or if you have new questions, again, we're happy to interact and give you feedback to the most pressing questions. So with that, Jonathan, again, thank you so much for being with us today. It was very exciting, and looking forward to the next session.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Let's do this again.
Amazing. Thank you, and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.